What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are here to talk a little bit about the Senior Bowl this past week and some of the standouts from each positional group that I noted either from practice or from the game, or I guess put them both together, because the game day, which was Saturday, is where the lights get bright, as Dan Campbell put it. And you want to see how guys perform in those situations. So let's get it started.
The city's been down and it found a way to get up. And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up. And then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down. We're going to take another hunk out of you. Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
Welcome everybody to a video. Glad you guys are here, and we're talking a little bit about this year's Senior Bowl. This was a super fun week of Senior Bowl action. I mean, the game on Saturday, we streamed it. I don't know if we've done that before. I don't think we have. I think that was the first time. I remember last year, I'm pretty sure I actually missed the game. I think I was actually at the gym. Yeah, I think I was playing basketball. But either way, this was a super fun week of Senior Bowl action, to follow the practices, to follow the one-on-ones. I love doing that. So the party's not going to end with this video. I'm going to be going live with Rad, I believe, on a Monday. So I think we may be diving into this once again, talking about some more standouts, maybe guys that let us down a little bit. But there was a few players at each positional group. Some positional groups, maybe only have 1 or 2 names we're going to go through here today, that did stand out to me throughout this week of practice that the Lions could possibly be interested in. So we did get to hear from the Detroit Lions coaching staff, specifically Dan Campbell and Randel and what they could possibly be looking for this offseason. I think we have a pretty good idea of what that may be, but they may have shed a little bit more light onto that. But again, you got to keep in mind that you can't take everything that they say as, yeah, that's exactly what they're going to do. And they're not going to go into very much specifics here. I mean, Dan Campbell basically said that he wanted to add help everywhere. You know, they wanted to add competition everywhere, which is understandable. Not a specific answer, but it's understandable that you want to do that. I mean, especially if you do end up with 10 draft picks through the comp picks. If you end up with 10 draft picks, you're going to have a lot of opportunities. Now, you could move the board, so you could lose some of those picks. You could add some picks to that. We'll have to wait and see. But you do have a lot of opportunities throughout this draft to add some help. And when Dan Campbell was asked about what he wanted specifically, he said, of course, we want to add help at every position. But the 4 things that he brought up, and again, you got to keep in mind that he's not going to go into specifics here. He probably left some things out that they will address. But the 4 positional groups that he did bring up, he said it would be nice to add some help at the receiver position, the linebacker position, 2 positions we're anticipating the Lions are going to address. I think linebacker does come around the middle of the pack. He also didn't specify whether he was talking outside linebacker or inside linebacker. I don't think he did. And we know that those 2 positions will probably both be addressed in this draft, specifically inside linebacker, depending on how free agency goes. And then he also brought up offensive line depth and defensive back help. Now, offensive line depth, that put a smile on my face. Okay, I heard him say that, and I felt real good. I feel like that's not a smokescreen. It's got to happen. So I'm glad the Lions are thinking on the same page there. And he also brought up defensive backs, which could be safety position, which immediately comes to mind as something that the Lions are going to be attacking this offseason, looking for help there. And then cornerback, possibly a little bit of help there too. Maybe another young guy. Maybe you get a vet in that group. Who knows? But anyways, that's what Dan Campbell brought up. I know it's very vague. It's very broad. But we know that they're not going to give us specific answers. And plus, they probably don't know for sure who they're targeting right now. I mean, they are still 2 months out, and they're trying to get a feel on that. And then you have Randel. Now, he was a little bit more specific, I guess, as he said that he was looking to draft 2 receivers. I mean, he's not the guy drafting, but he's looking to add 2 receivers through the draft and also 1 through free agency. Now, there is undrafted free agency, which you have to keep in mind. Wouldn't it shock me if the Lions did draft 2 receivers this year? It just wouldn't. I could see one being a higher pick. It does depend on what they do in free agency, because they said add some competition through free agency. Now, keep in mind, Josh Reynolds, Khalif Raymond, those guys are free agents. Tom Kennedy's also a free agent. Don't know if Kennedy's coming back. I really don't think he is, but Josh Reynolds, Khalif Raymond. He brought up those 2 guys specifically as 2 guys that they would like to bring back, so that could fill out the free agent role. Maybe they go bring in a more expensive free agent. I don't really see that happening. I don't see them bringing in a very expensive receiver through free agency. I think that'll be more addressed through the draft, but who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But just based on what their salary cap is, as of now, I believe it'll be heavier through the draft, a little bit cheaper through free agency. But maybe they bring back a guy like Josh Reynolds, who did some good things. And we know Quintez was doing some good things, who he brought up before his injury. And then Khalif Raymond, of course, what he brought as a blocker and some of the versatility there, because honestly, that guy was at times playing our ex-receiver, and he's like 5'9", right? Okay, well, I don't want to disrespect him, but I'm pretty sure he's 5'9". I don't know. I'll have to clarify that. I can see them going a higher pick than maybe someone to the mid/late rounds, because they do have 2 7th-round picks and 2 6th-round picks. And I think there was a few guys that did stand out through the Senior Bowl that possibly could have pushed their name into a higher draft pick, but I think there is some definite help that you could add in the 6th and 7th round. It just depends on how the draft is going and what your board looks like. So keep an eye out for that. So that's really the insight that we got on what they could be looking for. I think a lot of us have a pretty good feel on what they could be looking for. So I wanted to touch on that. We'll probably dive into that a little bit more on a Monday and what they could be looking for specifically. But let's take a look at each positional group and guys that I think stood out. I don't want to necessarily go through the guys that I think struggled. I mean, again, we'll probably hit that more on Monday, but guys that stood out, standouts from each positional group, and that guys the Lions could have their eye on when it comes to this year's draft. So let's start off with the quarterback position, of course. So we got to see all 6 quarterbacks. I think it was very important to get to see all these 6 quarterbacks because the biggest thing I was looking for was just how they performed in a different offense. We know Bailey Zappi, air raid offense, right? Malik Willis playing at Liberty, getting to see him against better competition for one, but just to see if he protects the football. Unfortunately, we only got to see the guy for a quarter, but that was with every quarterback. You know, Carson Strong, how does he perform? They all have different skill sets, different tool sets. I think some of them may have been built a little bit better to transition quickly to a different offense. You know, if any of these guys are drafted, they're going to have a full offseason to really bring this thing in. They'll probably, if any of these quarterbacks, these 6 that we saw in the Senior Bowl, if any of those 6 were drafted, they wouldn't be starting year 1 anyway because Jared Goff would be here to be the starter. So they'd have tons of time to understand where they're going to fit within this offense and understand the offense a little bit more than the time that they had throughout this year's Senior Bowl, especially the 3 quarterbacks that were in the Lions offense, right? Because there was only 3, Malik Willis, Bailey Zappi, and Sam Howell. Now keep in mind, again, like there's a lot of rules in place. They have to keep teammates together. According to Dan Campbell, it doesn't sound like they really got to pick the roster. It was really only one player. I'm pretty sure that they asked if he could be on their team. But aside from that, they kind of put the roster together. They did a good job with it. So the Lions kind of had who they had. So don't put too much stock in who was actually on their team because I don't think they'd want them to do that. Like, hey, go pick who you want because then at that point you may be giving some stuff away. But anyways, so the quarterback position, who stuck out? Okay, well, let's talk about the guys that I think performed well. First off, Sam Howell. I think he honestly performed the best on game day. Now, unfortunately, you don't get to see a ton of like one-on-ones and things like that throughout the week unless you watch it live. And I missed the first day of practice, you know, and then the second day the weather was bad and guys were struggling. Apparently, Malik Willis did the best there because throughout the bad conditions. But specifically in the game, the guy that I think definitely stood out to all of us was Sam Howell. He looked very calm, he looked very poised, and he had a couple of late drives that stuck out. I mean, he had the one before halftime, which stuck out where he got them into field goal range. Unfortunately, they missed the field goal. They tried to rush it on. He had the fumble, which led to that. But really stuck out was just how poised he was in those situations to move the ball up and down the field. I think for him, what really stuck out was his reactions to pressure, his reactions to a free rusher, things like that. And it's something they actually put down before we even got into this as one of his strengths when I was going through his player profile. Me and Rad did a video on that. That'll be up soon on Patreon. However, what stuck out with him is that he was able to react to pressure. I think what really sticks out about Sam Howell in his film is he does a great job of reacting to coverage that he sees and understanding where the holes in that coverage will be. And he does a really nice job with that. He's an underrated runner. We've seen that on his film. He looks kind of like a little Josh Allen when he runs. He's well built. He's got a little bit more speed than maybe that you would expect. So I think Sam Howell definitely stuck out when it came to the quarterback room. And so did Desmond Ridder. Now, he was on the other side, but Desmond Ridder, it seemed like a lot of play action, a lot of rollouts with him, but he handled it well. Like Desmond Ridder had some pretty accurate balls. I wish we could see more straight dropbacks in this game because the big question mark for him is ball placement consistency. His accuracy can very much be so like this, and that's why I'm weighing the film much heavier than just this one day of a game where you only see the guy for a quarter. See him really got it, getting his tight end involved, working with this tight end. Now, Carson Strong, on the other hand, he came out, he had an interception, he had the right read. I was open, he just underthrew the pass. But I thought he did a good job of responding to that, coming back, moving the pocket much better, finding the middle of the field, which is an area where he was very effective throughout his entire college career. You give him a good tight end, you got to believe he's going to have some success in the NFL, and that's who he started to go to. And you saw him move the pocket, looked much more comfortable, even with the pressure. Because to be honest, the offensive lines for both sides were struggling. There was a lot of false starts, trying to figure out the cadence, and I think someone brought that up in the comment section, so shout out to them, because I was like, why does this keep happening? But the D lines definitely beat the offensive line, so I thought for him, he did a much better job after that interception, getting things going. Bailey Zappi delivered some passes that stuck out. I mean, he had really the first, I think, shot of the day that was completed. You saw some of that, air raid offense come back to him, but then at the same time, he showed some velocity on some of the passes, which is very the biggest question with him is how much arm strength does he really have, and then outside of that offense. And I thought he made some plays outside of that. Now, he did have the interception, which sealed the deal, which he just threw late. I mean, he had a guy, he threw the pass late, he tried to roll out, he put him in position by making an off-schedule pass, but then he made a late pass to an open receiver that turned into an interception, which sealed the deal. For Malik Willis, my thoughts really didn't change on him too much after watching it. I mean, you didn't see a ton of pass attempts for him. It's my same things that I like about him showed up, and the same things that I don't like about him really showed up to me personally throughout every day. I mean, he performed well, apparently, I guess, in the rain. I didn't get to see that practice. I guess that's not a huge shock. He does have a big arm, like a very big arm, so being able to throw through those conditions and then, of course, take off in those conditions is nice. However, it's the same strengths and weaknesses that I took away coming into it, I think showed up. First off, he's a great runner. He looks like Lamar when he takes off, and you saw that. And you saw that when he took off right before, his time was over, when they thought we get a chuck up to the end zone, he took it to the 6-yard line. Then at the same time, as a passer, you saw some of the inconsistencies there. Some of the ball placement, he left one short. He could improve on some of his velocity based on where he's throwing the ball, because he does kind of struggle with sometimes throwing the ball too hard in certain situations. I'm not putting that Jalen Tolbert drop on him, but, certain situations, and he takes some unnecessary risk. I think sometimes he held the ball a little bit too long, and you even saw that show up on practice. Like the one play they were at the 5-yard line, the guy held the ball for like 8 seconds. It's like, man, you got to get the ball in your hands, looking for sometimes the shot play, not always taking his check down. Malik Willis needs development. I don't view him as a year one starter. He needs development. So he didn't really change my mind on anything after seeing this week. I think he's got a lot of attributes that you love, the ability to run and having a big arm. But for me, with the quarterback, I look a lot more at processing, up here, getting the ball out quickly, than I do at some of those intangibles and those things. But he is a player that does show off some really awesome plays in college, and he'll just need time to develop. Kenny Pickett, I think he was 6 for 6. He had a touchdown. I thought he had a nice read to his running back to get it out there and let him go to work. But I don't think Kenny Pickett falls to one of our picks. I think he's the first quarterback off the board. So who really stuck out? It was Sam Howell, especially in the game. Sam Howell, I think, performed the best. I think he picked it up very quick, and he did a really nice job making things happen off schedule, which really stuck out to me. But to me, that's who he is. He can make a lot of things happen on the fly, not just with his legs, because that's immediately comes to mind, but also how fast that he can diagnose, okay, this is what they're in defensively. Now where do I have to go? Where does the ball need to get to? I think that's what he's really good at. You do see accuracy issues, especially with pressure, and he did fumble, which you don't like to see after last year, but Sam Howell stuck out in that group to me. It was hard to judge a lot of our practice here because I didn't get to see a ton from these quarterbacks, but I do love how the Lions bring in competition drills. I mean, the just practice is just a normal practice, but the Lions go in there. Deuce Staley's got these hoop drills, and then all of a sudden you have this competition at the end where players got to pick their quarterback, and a lot of guys picked Malik. So we got to hear from Malik with his interview. I think he's a very likable guy. He's very popular. He seemed like he had a lot of friends. There's a lot of guys chose Malik, and he really was the closest on the target drill where they were trying to drop in the bucket. He hit it twice. Didn't go in, but he hit the bucket twice. Now, on the one where they were trying to throw it into the holes, the nets, he didn't make one in there. I think, who won that? I think Sam Howell won that drill. Maybe, you know what? I think Zappe actually won that drill. Let me take that big. I think Bailey Zappe won it. Got into the red zone. I think Malik Willis is a little bit less decisive. I think Carson Strong had a nice, 3 straight pass drive. Inside the red zone, everything speeds up. A lot of times you can't get through 4 reads. You got to be much quicker, much more decisive. And he had a nice little stretch there of passes and ball placement. Running back was interesting because I think different guys stood out at different times, especially in practice. We saw Robinson with a great blitz pickup. It was like, dang, he just stood up that rusher when they were doing the linebacker rushing drills, and the running back had to pick it up. And then you saw some nice route running. I thought Pledger had some nice route running. Ford had some nice route running when you watched him in some of the one-on-ones. Who stuck out in the game? I would say it was the Baylor running back Brown. I mean, he was a very physical, low to the ground type of runner, and he stuck out. And so did White a little bit, showing some of that effort. But Brown stuck out to me. I think he had the touchdown that was coming from Kenny Pickett. He was the guy that stuck out as a runner. I mean, he was that guy that would put his head down and you would feel it. Like that's what stuck out. I didn't think any running back was super dynamic, making guys miss. I mean, when the holes were there, they hit the holes, and just that. But he definitely made you feel it. We got to throw Hayward into this mix out of Michigan State. That fullback / tight end. He showed off a lot of versatility. I can't remember what Campbell called him. Was it Baby Ironhead or Hammerhead or something like that? Something of those variations. But man, I liked him throughout practice because he's a big body. And I remember seeing him when he played Michigan. I was like, dang, that dude is huge. He can run the ball. And I really stuck out was one of his route running drills where he got a nice little separation underneath, showed a little bit of shake, and then the hands. Hey, there's a lot of versatility to be had there, and I know Dan Campbell likes that. I think even when they got to the, hear what Ben Johnson called, they handed it right off to him. They just had a false start, so it didn't count. But I like him, and I think Campbell does too, because he brought him up himself. Not to say they're going to draft him or anything, but if Kabinda didn't come back, I wouldn't be mad at it. I'm just saying, I wouldn't. I like Kabinda, but I wouldn't be mad at it because the guy really could do everything. On to the offensive line. I thought there was a lot of struggles from the offensive line. Guys were getting work at different spots, so you got to keep that in mind. Throughout the week of practice, Zion Johnson was awesome at guard. I thought he was awesome. Put him at center, you saw some struggles. Trevor Penning got all the talk. To me, Faalele definitely went down. I don't understand why people think he's a first-round pick. Maybe I'll have to dive into more of his film, though, because to be honest, I haven't seen a ton of offensive tackle film. I've seen some guys, just not a ton yet, so he's one of those guys that I haven't dove into because I think the Lions will approach this mid to late rounds. But one guy I think did stand out, especially in that game that was rough for an offensive lineman, was Abraham Lucas in the right tackle position, which is where the Lions could add a backup for sure, depending on how he falls. Don't know how far he'll fall after that performance, but I thought his run blocking was good. You saw him moving people. To me, he was the guy that constantly stood out as a player that was showing second, that was showing extra effort, getting to the second level. Pass protection, you saw some good reps as well. One-on-ones are hard to judge because there's really not anybody else that's involved. It's just you on an island, and we saw ups and downs really from everybody throughout the week. I thought Stuber had a good week in practices, but to me in that game, Abraham Lucas was the guy that really stood out as an offensive lineman that the Lions could be interested in depending on how far he falls, and it's something that Dan Campbell did bring up. You saw guys like Chris Paul, he was getting work everywhere. At tackle, it was bad. They had Boye Mafe on him, and he was going to work on him. Chris Paul was trying to get reps at tackle, it just didn't look very good. He looks much more like a guard that could possibly play both guard spots, the guard out of Tulsa, but he would be the tackle that stuck out to me. On to the receivers. I mean, we're going to throw in tight ends and receivers here. First off, tight end Ferguson out of Wisconsin. He had an argument to be the MVP of that. I don't know who won it. I heard someone say Perion Winfrey won the MVP. I don't know if it's actually a thing or not, but to me, Ferguson stuck out. The tight end out of Wisconsin looked really good. I mean, he had a lot of production, especially coming from Ritter. He also caught a touchdown pass. Very reliable hands is what stood out through the game. So I'll bring him up for sure. When you watch practice, Isaiah Likely was moving up boards throughout practice and things like that. You know, Trey McBride looks still like the top tight end coming in this year's draft. But the guy that really stood out was Ferguson as a very reliable target. He made a really nice catch that was behind him on one of his crossing routes. So he was the guy that took the cape from the tight end position for me personally in that game. At the receiver spot, I think we learned a lot. Tolbert, you know, you saw some good, but there was also the pass catching, which concerns me. Romeo Doubs, I think throughout this entire week, Romeo, what you notice about Doubs is that his biggest concern was pass catching in the past, and I really didn't see that as an issue. He's very explosive in and out of breaks. He's got a lot of upside, in my opinion, and you could see it. Carson Strong looked comfortable throwing to him as a Nevada teammate. Romeo has a lot of explosiveness as soon as he catches the ball, but also in and out of breaks. He's fun to watch. I thought he had a nice week in the Senior Bowl, but another guy that had a nice week was Christian Watson. Now, he didn't show as much maybe separation, some of his deep routes as you would like to see, but what's nice about Christian Watson, you got a small school, North Dakota State player. What I liked about him coming in is the size, pairing that with what he can do once the ball is in his hands as a returner. They've used him like that. And I think Watson had a nice week of practice. He probably worked his way up some boards. He could be a mid-round prospect for sure because I like size. I like size in receivers this year that can make things happen after the catch. I just like that fit better with Jared Goff and the type of receivers that he's had success with going back to Cal. However, Calvin Austin, he had a fantastic week. Austin reminded me so much of Khalif Raymond. I'm telling you, Khalif Raymond was shaking guys out of their shoes at training camp. That's what he looked like. Yes, he's smaller, so it does maybe give him an advantage as a one-on-one route runner, but he had a lot of success. He made some really tough grabs. He shot up a lot of people's boards after this week, and if Khalif Raymond doesn't come back, he'd be an awesome replacement for him, and it's actually someone that Randel L brought up specifically because he did have a great week. Again, I don't love the size, but for what the size is, I thought he stood out for sure. Another guy, Khalil Shakir, and I don't think we really noticed him in the game, but throughout practice, Khalil Shakir, some of his route running, he was the guy that looked really nice. Good speed. He was a security blanket back in college, but then you see some of the route running nuances that you maybe didn't get to see a ton back at Boise State because you saw a lot of underneath routes, but you're just like, oh snap, he can kind of do it all. He stuck out to me as a route runner. And Bayless Jones Jr., a wide receiver out of Tennessee, really caught my eye because I'm watching one-on-ones initially and I'm like, oh, he's not catching anything. And then he comes back, you know, he gets stuffed because he runs route right into the cornerback that's playing inside leverage, so they give him another rep. He goes deep and he makes a nice over-the-shoulder grab. And I'm like, okay. Then I rewatch it. And I'm noticing all the little things he's doing as a route runner that's sticking out to me. You see the little head bobs, the little head fakes. Calvin Austin was outstanding at this, just giving you some kind of eye candy as a corner one-on-one. But Bayless Jones Jr. stuck out to me doing the same thing. These little movements that would give him a little bit of extra space. Bayless Jones Jr., one of the players that were probably on a lot of people's, day 3 mock. To me, he moved up boards. To me, my board, he's going to move up after this. And this is the first time I really got a nice glimpse of what he could do. He didn't have the production, I don't think, at Tennessee that much, but he did shine to me in terms of being a route runner and looking pretty nice with some of his different ways that he could catch the ball. So he's one of the guys that stuck out to me for sure. Those are some of my standouts as the receiver position throughout this week. Again, we'll dive into more of this on Monday tomorrow with Rad. On to the defense side of the ball, the defensive line. Couple guys here. I had eyes on a lot of guys here, and I wish I could rewatch this because it was kind of hard to focus during the game. But throughout the week, going into the game, who stood out? Well, First off, speaking with the big bodies, Travis Jones throughout the week was dominant. I mean, he was really dominant. I'm not going to say Aaron Donald dominant, but he was really dominant. He's a big body, nose tackle out of UConn that showed me a lot more than I was expecting. Of course, the bull rush against guys like Cole Strange was just a mismatch, but he showed me a little movement. He showed me a little first step explosiveness that I wasn't anticipating from a guy at his size. And that's something you can build off. When you got a guy that's 320 plus, you're not really expecting a lot of that first step. So all that is an advantage. It's just an addition to what you expect him to be, which is kind of just a space-eating run defensive lineman. But to me, he worked up on boards because one-on-one, he showed you that he could get by. Now, in the game, he didn't show as much impact there, but he can definitely move guys back into the pocket. Definitely did some work one-on-one. Showed me a little bit more with his hands than I expected, and a little bit more of that first step explosiveness than I expected. So he was a guy that definitely moved up my board after this week a little bit. Another guy throughout the week in one-on-ones that I think made some plays was Otito out of UCLA. He made some plays in one-on-ones as well. Nice little length you see on the guy. Devontae Wyatt, he looked like possibly a round one pick. His combination of speed, athleticism, length that you all put together, and it's like, okay, that's a very well-rounded prospect. Logan Hall, I think he came around late, especially in the game. I think when you watched it during the week, you saw some good, you saw some bad. He can just throw a variety of pass rush moves. He can win the leverage battle, and he can counter that by getting over top and winning with the swim move. He can get high if that swim move doesn't win, especially if a center can come over and help him and he gets a 2-on-1. Then you can see him kind of moved out of the play and then he has to completely reset. But what I like about Logan Hall is he came on late and you saw him in that game force a couple pressures. He had a pressure on the interception. He had a pressure on the play before where he did a nice little stunt work with Mafe, and we know he has the athleticism to do so. Farrell Jr., I thought, had a nice week of practice. LSU defensive lineman. He showed some ability and he was making some plays in practice days when they were going 11-on-11, especially against the run. Of course, Perion Winfrey. I mean, Winfrey, what I like about the guy is that his energy, his motor. I mean, he was just so enthusiastic to play, you could tell. Now, when you watch his film, again, I'm going to weigh that heavier. Very inconsistent, wasn't on the field consistently. You also notice that he doesn't always use his arms very well. Me and Rad did a nice video on this, so that'll be up at some point too. But he does lunge with his head, and he does look inconsistent. He was off the ball last many times when you watch this film. But Winfrey had 2 sacks in this one, hustle sacks. Didn't counter them extremely well. I don't think in one-on-one sometimes he would kind of beat the guy with one thing and he'd come back and run the same move and they'd stand him up and they just adjust for it. But he showed you that he has an arsenal. Winfrey's a cool prospect for sure because I liked him. He stuck out to me immediately at Oklahoma. He just needs more consistency there. But definitely as a developmental piece that can give you a pass rush, and he's going to work as a defensive lineman. Pretty rough around the edges, but he was fun to watch, and it led to 2 sacks, which is exciting for the guy, especially when they're effort sacks that he just sticks with it. Now, at the edge position, there's a couple of obvious ones. Boye Mafe. I mean, I think he came on a lot of guys' radar after this week. And when you watch his film, he's also a guy that's not always out there on early downs, but as a pass rusher, he definitely has a high upside. Very quick with his hands, really nice get off. And he went to work on some teams like Nebraska. Now, Ohio State was much quieter, didn't have as much production against Ohio State as their tackles play better. So that's concerning. In this, you got to keep in mind, he's getting guys like Chris Paul who's playing out of position at tackle, and he's going to work on them. But Mafe definitely, to me, would have been the MVP from this game because he was consistently in the backfield. His hands, his explosiveness. I mean, he consistently beat tackles over and over and over and over. And watching some of his film, you also know that he can drop back into coverage. He can play man on a running back. Nice athlete, good size. If that was a player that slipped to the mid-rounds and the Lions wanted another edge, would not shock me if they jumped on him. But I think after this performance, he's probably pushing himself into round 2 conversation for sure. Definitely some inconsistencies on his film, especially against teams like Ohio State, was to me, again, my MVP from this entire thing. But a lot of edge had success. And I don't know if there was any edge that really moved down the board from what I saw from this week. I mean, we all know about the guys like Kingsley from South Carolina. You saw some really nice hands, especially on the one-on-ones. Just a variety of moves that he could throw at you and how he can react to different type of punches from an offensive lineman. And you got some of those big names, but it was about the guys that I didn't really know about that kind of shined a light, and it was like, oh, snap, I got to check him out. Kingsley, we all know about guys like this, right? Ebikete, Jermaine Johnson. I mean, I had a pretty good feel. Sanders, I had a pretty nice feel. I don't think any of them struggled. Plus, when you got offensive line playing different spots, you're going to see that. They're really going to struggle because some of these guys, I mean, they're probably day 3 picks anyways, and now you're putting them at different spots. You're going to see big-time struggles. But there were different guys that were like, oh, snap, I got to check him out. Mafe, Isaiah Thomas. I thought Isaiah Thomas really started to shine during the game. The Oklahoma edge rusher. Lucetta got involved. I mean, Ebikete, I liked him throughout practice. The Penn State edge rusher. I mean, he's more of a power rusher to me. Jermaine Johnson flashed, I think, early. He You just didn't get to see him at the end. Day 3 he didn't play, and then the game he didn't play. But a lot of things I expected about Jermaine Johnson, I think, showed up. He's a very powerful guy that I think will make his money as a run defender, and he'll give you a lot of upside as a pass rusher because he's extremely relentless, and he's got a lot of power. Tyreek Smith, he showed a lot of get off that impressed me, the edge rusher at Ohio State. But the guy that really stood out to me and really came on my radar this week from the edge position has to be D'Angelo Malone. This is an edge rusher out of Western Kentucky that, to me, in the game you saw him flash. In one-on-ones you saw him flash. He just showed you a nice little combination of everything. Speed, power, athleticism, and then you also combine that with utilizing his hands, getting inside, outside, some bend. He was all over the place. Malone definitely worked his way up my boards, and he really came to my attention because I didn't know much about the guy at all. Like, really nothing about the dude until this week, and I was like, oh snap, that guy stood out. I mean, you got two Western Kentucky guys there, Bailey Zappi, D'Angelo Malone. Who would have thought that I'd be thinking about more of D'Angelo Malone than Bailey Zappi after this week? I've seen a guy like Mafe on his film play man coverage, and it's very impressive, his speed in open area, the athleticism out there to match up man-to-man. But I saw a rep where Malone was on the tight end. And I think it's just going to feel, okay, how does he react? Can he cover that? You know, just how does he look in that situation? And man, I mean, he gave up the reception, I believe, but he was in a pretty good spot. Malone is someone I'm excited to watch film on. He stood out big time. I think he put himself on my radar after an awesome week. But a lot of edge rushers, I think, made themselves some money possibly throughout this week. But he was the guy to me because I just really didn't know anything about him. And he, to me, will not at all be a day 3 pick. Not after this. No, I'm going to have to dive into his film. He's made me interested in wanting to watch the guy's film after the way that he performed. Move on to the backside. Now, linebackers, again, I wish I could rewatch it to really see what stuck out. I think throughout practice, I mean, different guys had their moments. Chad Muma had an interception go right through his hands in the game, but I think Muma looked good. I think Muma does work his way up as a top inside linebacker. I think he'll be a stud year 1. I think he's an immediate impact player, and I think he'd be awesome for the Lions. I'm just going to say that. He may be my second favorite linebacker in this entire class when it's all said and done. But at the linebacker position, everybody had their moments. You know, DeMarco had his moments. I think Anderson had his moments. I didn't get a great feel in the linebacker position, unfortunately. I would say DeMarco and Muma stuck out to me a little bit, but I just didn't get a great feel for it because, unfortunately, I didn't get to watch it back. Petrie had the interception to seal the deal, which was just a really late throw. It probably shouldn't have happened. He stood out. Petrie is more of a slot cornerback playing the safety position, but you can see this interception was from a deep high look. Sorry for messing up his name. I've taken a look at a little bit at his film and not a ton, but I know he's more of a slot corner, so that'll be an interesting transition. But hey, that's a good play. That looks really good, and I know he made a few plays, some of their practice drills defensively as well. And then also O'Neal out of A&M. He was all over the place as a run defender. He'll be a guy they have to take a look at, see how he does in coverage, but as a run defender, he brought the juice, that energy. He was just hyped after every play. O'Neal, good size, and he was making some hits. And at the cornerback position, again, it was a little bit tougher here because usually wide receivers are always winning these one-on-one battles. A couple of guys did stick out, and it wasn't necessarily Kobe Bryant. I know he was probably the most hype corner coming in, but the guys that I wrote down that stuck out to me from the cornerback spot a little bit, guys that did catch my eye multiple times throughout this thing had to be Mario Goodrich, the cornerback out of Clemson. Good size. He's pushing 6'1". I just like the style. I like the build from a guy like Mario Goodrich. I know he had a pass breakup throughout the one-on-ones. And then Tariq Woolen, cornerback out of UTSA. Shout out to the UTSA guys represent. I'm pretty sure they had a really good season. Shout out to those guys. Woolen is very intriguing as well. Really good size, nice length. He really stuck out and kind of flashed on my radar. So cornerback was a little bit harder to judge as well because in the game you can't really see what they're doing. Kobe Bryant had the PI that I thought was kind of soft. But then one-on-ones, usually wide receivers are winning those. They have the advantage. McCreary, you know, the cornerback out of Auburn, probably the best cornerback in there aside from Kobe Bryant. And I think McCreary did well, especially in the one-on-ones. There's definitely some corners that I'm going to have to dive into. Cornerback is probably the position I've dove into the least amount up to this point throughout the draft process. But Woolen and Goodrich are two guys that kind of under the radar, definitely under the radar to me, definitely flashed a few times throughout this week. And then, of course, you got to take in mind, you got guys like Danny Gray, who was apparently the fastest player throughout the week there at the Senior Bowl. Doesn't shock me. Gray was a guy that could get over top a lot back in college. But those are some of the dudes that stuck out to me throughout this. I mean, unfortunately, we didn't get to see everybody like Jermaine Johnson in the game day. Again, I'm still going to weigh their film heavier, but there's some players that stuck out. And we'll dive into this more tomorrow when we talk with Rad, some of the players that didn't stick out, maybe even more deeper than just original standouts, maybe some guys that flashed, some good, some bad, maybe guys that are like, oh, he fits the scheme. We'll dive into that more on Monday, but these were just some standouts from each positional group. Special teams look rough, except for Stout. He was punting the heck out of the ball, so shout out to him. But aside from that, special teams, did look a little rough. But those are some of my standouts from each positional group. Let me know who stood out to you at each positional group. Let's go with the specific positional group. How about we do this? Who stood out to you at the running back position from this week? Let me know that in the comments below, if anything. Thank you, Prop, for watching, and I'm